with Larry Robertson, who is an advisor on leadership and communication and now author of Why You. We're going to be speaking to Larry today about his journey to be, where he is now, the author of an incredible book and a leader in the space of being able to coach entrepreneurs, coach leaders to really be the best version of themselves. So Larry, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Before we jump into it, I'd love if you could share a little bit about your journey with us. So how did your journey into this space get started, and what was it about being able to help support others on their journey that made you so excited?
Gosh, that's a big question, and I'll try and keep it a simple answer. My early career was British Army. So I was a young army officer, and that came really out of the blue. I mean, it wasn't planned. I was the least likely of my siblings to get into uniform, as my father realized. However, I decided to join the army, and it was the best thing I probably ever did, because I was a bit of a, not rebel, but I was just probably unruly and ill-disciplined when I was at university. And so getting that sense of discipline, teamwork, clarity, purpose, and actually feeling was making a bit of a difference. And in those days, the British Army still had a small empire with a very small e. So my first posting was Hong Kong. I was in Central America. I was in Africa briefly, and obviously UK and Germany and places. So in that role, you work with people who are often far more skilled than the young officer is. They've been in uniform probably several more years. They could be younger or older. They perhaps don't have quite the background that I had. But I realized very quickly that I needed to respect their skills. And the fact that I was wearing the commission on my shoulder meant simply that they would do what I asked them to do. But if I was sensible, I would get them involved in that process so that I would make the decision, but it was one that they were already at least in agreement with, probably the right word. So that was, teamwork became very, very clear to me. Obviously, been a teamwork at school, university, but really in uniform, often in quite challenging situations, I realized that teamwork was critical, and you're not going to succeed on your own. And that's probably the underlying message in this book, or in fact on the front cover, it's underlying, where it says, why listen to, work with, and follow you? That's the question. No one has to, after all. We have to choose. It's like me choosing to come here today. You choosing to listen to me. We don't have to listen. So what is it that gets people to want to work with people or to follow people? And yes, all of us, most of us have to earn a crust every day. Most of us have to pay the bills and all those things. But it's a question of you just turn up to do the job, or do you actually turn up because you really want to be there and want to contribute to make a difference? And the leader's role is to enable that circumstance and to make people, whatever the circumstance, but make people feel engaged, make people feel appreciated, and give them a clear sense of meaning and purpose, so that they feel valued and want to contribute, as I've said, rather than because they have to, because they really want to. And so they give what I call 100%. So I haven't answered the question very well, because I've now gone from the army straight to this, but I can go on if you like.
I'd love to hear a little bit more about, what happened between the army and,
of course.
You being here and, being such a celebrated person in this space with so many amazing founders.
Yeah. So, I mean, after the army, I knew I wouldn't be a career officer, so I left at 26 as a young captain. And I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do next, but I knew that I liked people, I was good with people, and I was very outcomes driven. I learned, I guess, the army, I suppose I learned that from. And so after a very short spell selling expensive motor cars in Park Lane in London, pay off my mess bill, I realized I wanted to get into advertising. And I was very lucky, I described the story in the book here, I was very lucky to join what was then regarded the world's most creative advertising agency, an extraordinary place called Collett, Dickinson and Pierce. And I just joined them as a junior kind of executive. My first boss was a woman, I'm pleased to say. She was my age and terrifying, and a marathon runner and brilliant. Her boss was a woman. I learned diversity very quickly, not just gender, but diversity of thought, of personality, of background, of skills and age and so forth. Again, coming from a military background, rather different, of course, more linear, in those days very Anglo-Saxon, very white, very male. So I was just excited to be in that environment. And while I was running very fast to keep up, I felt valued and felt part of this, and I was there to contribute even from day one. So I ended up doing quite well in that agency, and then I met an Aussie girl, and I'd been to Australia a few times at that point, and she was studying in London, and we ended up coming to Sydney, where I started an advertising business, and she started her interior design business. And that business, I won't go into the detail of that, but that business taught me a lot again about why people choose to do business with people. I ultimately sold that business just during the recession we had in the 90s. And then there was another big challenge. What am I going to do? Because unemployment was 14%, interest rates were retail level about over 20%. Pretty frightening time. Yeah. And we had two very small houses, one you couldn't live in, uninhabitable. We had two large mortgages and a very small child. And luckily, my wife had recession-proof clients. So life was a little uncertain, put it that way. But I sat down in the library in Sydney and worked out what was I really all about. I put together a bit of an exercise. I realized that leadership, teamwork, people, communication, creativity to a point were all things that turned me on. And again, I describe the story in the book in some detail, so I won't spend too much time on it now. But it's really analysing what turns me on, what doesn't, what am I good at, if anything, what am I not so good at, lots of stuff. What do I like doing, what do I not like doing? And so coming out of all that, I realised that I didn't want to go and work for anybody. I'd already done 4 years of being self-employed, if you like. And I felt I should continue doing that if I could find a way. Also, I reckon I was unemployable anyway, really. And so I worked out, well, I can offer leadership, I can offer communication. I looked at the environment here. I decided we were going to stay. My wife and I thought we'd stay in Australia. We're happy here. But I realised that looking around that I wasn't very inspired by people. It's a rather rude thing for me to say. I mean, obviously there were very inspirational people, but the people I was coming across in the business world I had come across in those 4 years, I found were very well educated, very decent, hardworking people, but not very passionate about what they did, as far as I could tell. And this was so different to what I had been brought up to, both from in schooling and university days, the army, advertising, of course. Even the London cabbies, you're probably aware, getting in a black cab in London, you'll find the driver is going to engage with you, may irritate you, but he's going to engage you in some sort of conversation, and you'll leave with either being excited and elated or perhaps rather irritated, but there was some connection. And I just wasn't getting that from a lot of the business people, and pretty senior business people that I met here. I thought, well, how do I help these people in leadership positions be better leaders? And I realized then that communication, of course, was 80% of a leader's job, that you can be the smartest kid on the block, you can have all the qualifications, biggest office and bank balance and the like. But if no one's listening, no one's following.
All right. Wow. And that is so true. I think one of the things that in our community has been quite a big topic of discussion is the transition from going, from a sole trader or a one-man band, where you know your industry so well, you know your craft so well, you know your customers so well, and then to having a team. So, everyone starts by hiring one person and then two people, and then often what happens is it creates a bit of a snowball where you're able to start scaling your business. And as you scale your business, you might grow your headcount more. For a lot of founders, I think they find it so challenging to deal with that shift in role. So they go from being the doer and everything to then having to delegate and lead a team and inspire a team and communicate to a team and communicate with a team. And, that shift is so significant. What are some of the things that you've observed over your time in this space for founders who are going through that transition?
It's a lovely point you make. And even I myself, I'm not the world's best example, because although I started the business with the name Robertson Burns, and the Burns character has never actually existed. Burns was named after the famous Scottish poet Robert Burns. And again, in the book, I just briefly describe how that came about. And so, apart from having a couple of part-time employees who I bring in from time to time, this has been very much a one-man band for me, because I decided that I enjoy doing this, and B, I really wanted to be the person that sort of did it, I guess. And as I mentioned to you a few minutes ago, working with me is called being Larried, and only Larry can Larry people. And so people, clients would say to me, I really want to work with you, I really want you. What I do is not overly formulaic. There was obviously some things you can delegate, as I did with some of those younger people who came to work with me. In fact, one is still associated with me now. But looking at the more typical startup, which I've helped, I'm very proud to say, 2 young men, both Australians, both now running businesses in the United States, one on the East Coast, one on the West Coast, and looking to see what they were trying to do, understanding their passion, if you like. And I'm proud to say I met one of them when he was a top flight potential partner in a big law firm in the city here in Sydney, and realised quite quickly he could obviously do that, but did he really want to do it? Mm-hmm. And I realised that he didn't want to do it. Mm-hmm. So we negotiated with his boss in that big law firm that they should have a sabbatical. Cut a long story short, I won't go into the details, a great story, but he is now 40 years old, so that was about 11 years old he left that firm. He's now running a very serious, fast-running startup in San Francisco. And not just in San Francisco, but it has global reach. And I look and see where that came from, and I look at the other younger man in New York, who got a smaller team, but again, and much more recently initiated his business. But again, growing quite rapidly and bringing in some very smart people, several of whom, well, I would say all of whom, are older than him, all older than him, many of whom are highly experienced in previous startups and have made, actually in some cases, a lot of money in the way they sold those businesses, but they've come back in now. Don't have to work for it, I don't think, but they've come back to work for him. I think the key is obviously to have absolute passion for what it is you want to do. You've got to have that desire, because we all know we have bad days and good days. You've got to find people who get that passion, who are enthused by that. Again, what I said earlier, we're not looking for people who's going to just turn up for a 9-to-5 job, because as a startup, there are no business hours.
Very true.
As you would know yourself, we like to try and create some sort of parameters, obviously, around the working day, of course. But nevertheless, people have to be excited by what we're trying to do. They've recognized what is the purpose, who we're trying to help in some way or other, who we're trying to give an experience to, who we're trying to deliver some particular product to. And that means that you have to get people, and that's the hardest thing, to find people who genuinely, they're not going to put themselves on the front line as much as you are, but you have to feel they're right with you. And again, like I saw in the army, I felt that in the army, and again in that agency, the people were there for a sole purpose, to produce some of the world's best advertising for our clients, to enable their success. And you've got to get people therefore aligned around a purpose. And that's aptitude, personality, obviously background. Clearly you're going to need some skills. So perhaps you need people who are good at finance, perhaps you're not so good at finance, marketing, technology, etc. So you're going to need those things, because again, I know my small business, and I have a virtual assistant I use in Manila, and she tolerates me just. But she's great, because she does things that either I can't do or just simply don't want to do, or I know I can spend better use of my time doing those things. So I think we have to sit down and say, well, what is a business? What are the business you're in? What are the things you need, or what are the things you're staying too long on that are stopping you from actually being in the front line, stopping you from engaging with potential customers or intermediaries, and they're stopping you from doing what you really love doing. And there are people out there who will help you do those things, but again, they've got to come on board because they obviously trust you. And they feel that they can believe in you and what you're doing. They feel you care about them, that it's more than just give them a wage, but actually you're genuinely interested in them and you want to help them grow and then hopefully be part of that foundation of that business. And again, come back to what I said, having a very clear sense of purpose and direction of what we're trying to do. What does success look like down the track? And often we won't know that immediately. I mean, my experience, I just got rather frustrated when I was young. What do you want to be when you grow up? I had no clue, frankly. And a lot of people who are successful haven't got a clue. But I think what I discovered when I did this exercise, which is in the book, as I've said, that identifying what did turn me on, that did put a smile on my face, that what I did enjoy doing without looking at the clock, that when I got to know who I am as a person as best I could, and obviously taking a bit of advice from people, that clarity was really important.
And if you had to, say you were getting into an elevator, and when you got into the elevator, someone recognized you, and they said, "Oh my gosh, it's Larry, and I want to be Larried." And in that time, that you had with them, which may have only been like 30 or 60 seconds, what would be the kind of 3 key lessons or takeaways, or I guess golden nuggets that you would say to someone who just wants to be a good leader? Where do you start?
I'm glad you use the sort of metaphor of a lift, because the book is full of lift stories. I often amused by, you get into lifts in some of the bigger buildings around here and elsewhere, and people just sit there and stay in silence, don't they? Or they look at their iPhone, perhaps, or they look at their shoes. And I think, what a missed opportunity. Because very probably people in that lift are probably working for the same company or the same organisation. I've even had people introduce themselves in the lift. I mean, they didn't know each other before, but by the time we get out the other end, they do. Or wondering who was that.
Exactly.
I would, the areas that I focus on, and depending on, they might tell me I wouldn't mind a bit of help with this. And the word help is important. I mean, I'm in the help business. And I say to most people in the help business, because you're either helping satisfy some need of somebody. It's even it's for a washer for the leaking tap. That's helping somebody. So I think if you're going to be in business of any kind, frankly, you've got to see yourself as being some sort of service. And we may call service industries more things that don't manufacture, but I don't agree with that. I think everything is service. And I think I grew up to that fairly early on, that leadership's about service. So I think we have to get our head set that we're around, I'm there to help. So that's the first thing I'm doing. So someone says to me, Larry, great to see you. I wouldn't mind having a chat with you, but very briefly, it's about this. Or I might say, well, okay, how are you feeling? I might say, well, first of all. So I might talk a bit about them first. What's going on? So I get a sense of who they're bringing to the party, where they're at. That's where it has to start. Then I would say, sort of how are you going with maybe your people or your customers, so it's that engagement model, because again, as I said, we won't succeed on our own. So how's that going? And then thirdly, are we still on track? Which is obviously, are we going when we said we do, the strategy, delivery, and so forth. And just by asking those three questions, I might get some sort of, actually, you're right, I'm actually in some trouble with some of my people, or I had a really difficult situation with a customer the other day. Could be that.
And what's the best piece of advice that you've ever received related to leadership and communication?
That's a really tough question. I think it's probably just, it's awful cliche, but to be yourself. And again, I touch on this in the book, because being oneself is not quite as simple as it sounds. Because we're never quite satisfied with ourselves. And I've realised at the age I've now finally reached, taking me all this time, and my father did tell me I'd be a late developer, so it sort of finally hit me, that I don't need actually to try and be somebody else. I don't need to be as good as him or her. In terms of what I might admire, I can admire them and say, well, wow, that's fantastic. And I can be mesmerised or inspired or excited or impressed. But that's her, that's him. And they're simply being the best of themselves.
Right.
And I realised that, I'm clearly not, while I could have achieved more in my life, I have no doubt, and I could be a bit better at than I am, I have no doubt. The fact that I've had three careers, if you like, two short ones, army and advertising. This is my third business now, so the advertising business I set up, we sold. I have a business with my wife out on our small farm, which is about small events and so forth. And now this thing. And so clearly, and they haven't touched wood, got bust yet. I mean, we occasionally get close to the bone with the bank manager, but we haven't gone totally bust, as I'm aware. And so we've been a success in a small way. We're not trying to be a unicorn, I accept that, but it was never really my intention to be a unicorn. I was just excited, I think, to break out of what I consider to be a fairly traditional, quite restricted, upper-class British twit sort of world, which in many ways you would call today privilege, but I mean, I didn't think of that in those days, of course. That's really what it was. To break away from that and to be a bit of a rebel, to do my own thing, to live on a farm rather than wanting to live in some smart suburb in Sydney or Melbourne or somewhere, to ride my motorbike, to get on my tractor, and still put on a smart suit and tie if I have to, and just have some fun, actually, and just enjoy doing what I do and seeing the results of, I helped that person, I helped that lady, I helped that get the first job, or I helped them get through a very difficult shareholder meeting, or help them build their team, or the CEO role, or those startups I mentioned.
That's amazing. It's very inspiring, I think, to hear from someone who is so motivated by service. As you said, leadership is about service. And I think that underlying kind of philosophy around what leadership actually means sometimes gets a bit forgotten because there's so much noise. And so I think really coming back to the foundation of what a leader really is, and even hearing your story, your journey, and, the examples you just gave about what makes you feel good, I think is very powerful. The last question that I have for you, and this is a question that for anyone watching, you probably know that I ask this question as a last question a lot, but I'd love to hear about what having and making the most of one life really means to you. So what are your thoughts on that? What's your philosophy on how you make the most of the one life you have?
Of my life, yes. Again, that's a lovely question. I think it is about what difference have I made for other people. I don't want to sound like some prophet or some religious character. I don't want to big note myself in that way. But I think there's nothing more fun than having somebody with a smile on their face, thanks so much, that was great, or it's been really helpful, or I want to send just dropping you a note because I achieved that, whatever that was, or we've done this, or we've reached that target. I mean, that's exciting. I think from a personal point of view, apart from that's the external life, if you like. Internally, I mentioned we live on this farm. I grew up in quite a big property in Scotland. I quite like the hillside of the country. I don't need to be looking at the sea all day, as much as we have lots of lovely beaches and sea here. So getting my hands dirty and achieving something, rocks, wood, getting quite dirty from the process, actually is exciting. And looking back at the end of the day and say, well, I've helped do this or helped do that. Or my wife and I, we bought this funny old derelict early 19th century farm collection of farm buildings in the southwest of Sydney, been uninhabitable for several years. And I just fell in love with it. And dare I tell you, I bought it without telling my wife. That was quite risky. It had no running water or power. But what we've managed to do there, and it's not anyway grand, but we have, I think, made our mark in terms of repurposing, is probably the smart word today, repurposing a collection of rather charming early Australian European buildings and put them back on their feet and create a rather beautiful property around it, which people visit from all over the world. And
that's great.
again, I mentioned my wife's book about it, which is sold out. That's, I think, exciting. We feel we've given something back to Australia in a small way, because when we move on from there, it'll still be there, hopefully.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Larry. It's been amazing to hear some of your nuggets of, I guess, lessons and learnings about what it really means and what it takes to be a really fantastic leader. And I think for everyone watching, there were so many practical things that you said that you can translate into your kind of everyday journey as an entrepreneur, and as a leader. So thank you so much for sharing it, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful.